This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dina. Welcome to our February ACC IG PPKM meeting. We're really excited to have you with us. We've got a really exciting topic for you. We're going to continue our theme of all things project knowledge, change management related. But first, I want to welcome everyone to our 2022 IG year. Andre and I are really excited to have you guys with us. Could be some new faces and new names. Well, we welcome you to ACC and to our specific interest group here on our topic. Andre, do you have any opening New Year remarks for the audience before we introduce our guest speaker today?
No, just to ditto what you said. Just welcome everyone. We're looking forward to a great new year.
Awesome. Great. So again, we've got an exciting topic for you today. We have a guest speaker that's going to be joining us. I'll let him introduce himself here in a minute, but we're going to be talking about change management. We've got, many of us have talked in the past about different initiatives that we've taken on within our legal functions, whether that be from some of the D&I work we have, whether it could be some new technologies and introductions of innovative solutions in the AI space. But no matter what it is, change management is very important. We've had some of our own internal presentations on change management topics in the past year and a half, but we thought it'd be really great to have you have a presentation from a company that specializes in this particular field, that has certification programs. There's not a lot that are out there, so we're very fortunate to have this particular company join us. So just to give you guys an idea of the logistics, we're going to have Dave introduce himself here shortly. He's going to have a presentation for you as well to introduce the topic and walk you through some critical aspects of change management. Also talk a little bit about the program offering from the company that he's part of. We will do some quick kind of logistics items as well, just to kind of talk a little bit about ACC in general and this particular IG group. I'm going to make the shameless plug of offering up for this audience to co-chair this particular interest group, as I am going to be rolling off here in the next 2 months or so. So I'll add that to the end of the agenda, and then we'll certainly open up for any comments and questions. As with all meetings, we welcome you to ask questions throughout the presentation. We've already kind of given Dave an idea of kind of how we operate. Sometimes we go off of our mic and ask a question. Sometimes we like to post in the chat, and then between Andre and I, we will moderate it, and then we will look for a natural pause in Dave's presentation and then ask the question. But please, we encourage you to use all ways of commenting, asking a question, sharing some of your viewpoints. Dave's going to talk to you. We might even use a bit of a different technology just to get your opinions and thoughts on things too. So I won't take away his thunder for that. But again, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. You could still say that, just like still wearing white after Labor Day at a certain point. So welcome everyone to a new year of ACC PPKM IG. So Dave, I'll let you introduce yourself, and we're ready for the presentation.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. At least where I am, I'm on the East Coast of the U.S. I am just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. So welcome, or thank you for letting us join you this afternoon. And just Dina, Andre, thanks so much for including us, inviting us to join. With me is Jeremy Carson, who he and I work closely together every single day, working with clients to really support their needs and kind of in the mission of ProSci, which we'll get into here in a moment. I want to kind of echo what Dina said is, I do have a presentation I'm going to walk through, kind of share with you some things that we kind of handpicked, knowing, what was shared about the audience, just to emphasize a few things. But I would like it to kind of be as interactive as we can, which may be more chat than coming off, what you're welcome to do, come off of mute and ask questions as we go. So very informal, that's our style. But please, as we get towards the end of this, if there's anything in way of follow-up, I'll leave some information if you're interested around how to get a hold of Jeremy or myself. So with that, I think I will take control. I can do this correctly. And everybody see that okay? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Andre, we go.
There we go. We
Okay.
originally were seeing your other, so
I'm
perfect.
a little slow on the technology today. So if you don't know about ProSci, and it is ProSci, we get often asked, how do you pronounce it? And it stands for professional science. So the firm's been around about 25, 26 years, started as a research house, and that research led to one of our, I'll say, portfolio of services today, which is training. And our training programs, most of those who know us for our certification programs specifically. But that was really kind of the core of ProSci's offerings for many years. Since then, we've actually moved into advisory services or consulting as well to support those coming out of those training programs in the application of the learning and the success of change. And then the other thing that we do as ProSci is we pride ourselves in really being thought leaders in change management. And what that looks like is a lot of, I'll say, content, both thought leadership, white papers, research papers, webinars, etc. We do license a lot of that content. So ProSci is based in Fort Collins, Colorado. But I think the important thing today is really to talk about, what are some of the success factors of change management. And then really what that starts is, with ProSci's value proposition to change, what do we do? How do we differentiate ourselves? And ProSci is really all about helping individuals and organizations build change capabilities. So people say, oh, you guys are in the training business. We say, no, we're in the capability building business, the knowledge transfer business. So what's unique about you guys? Well, our approach to change is research-based. The other thing that's unique about our approach is it's scalable and holistic. And what that means is really the tools and techniques that we use can be applicable at the enterprise level, at the program or project level, at the individual level. And ADCAR, whom you may have heard of before, kind of the star of the show at ProSci, our individual change model is something that is very easily applied at different levels of an organization. And then the last thing that we pride ourselves in is just the simplicity. We, by design, take the science of change management, the discipline of change management, and we dummy it down on purpose. One of our design characteristics is what we call simple elegance. So we try to take a science and really kind of make it easy to understand, easy to retain and use. The other thing that I think is important about our process or our approach to this business is that we are, I think, in the capability transfer business. People say, what do you guys do? And that's the answer, is we do work with organizations to build your internal change capability. Our approaches are based on the research and some of the tools that we've developed and based on those lessons learned, best practices, et cetera. But really, that is what ProSci does, is we are a capability transfer firm. We are a global firm. It's kind of a hard chart to read here. The short story is we have 5 wholly owned offices around the globe, and then we have 30 certified partners. And what we are committed to being is really the go-to partner for change success around the globe. That is our mission. So our partners are able to deliver our services and our training, as well as, in the US, Canada, Australia. We have a new wholly owned subsidiary in Latin America and in Spain. So ProSci's really grown up quickly over the last 25 years. And although we're not big in number, we really are, I think, the number one brand, if you will, in change management today. So that's it. I don't like talking about ourselves a whole lot, but I just wanted you to know who we are. If you haven't heard of ProSci, that's a quick download of who we are, how we approach our jobs, our business, and a little bit about our reach globally. What I do want to spend more time on is talking about these 3 buckets here. Why change management? So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think the deeper dive is in this middle here around the research success factors, and we'll tee that up. And then we could talk about, okay, if those are the critical success factors, how do I get started? What are some of the maybe common approaches that Jeremy and I have deployed with clients that have been successful? So that's kind of the flow of the day, of the time together. Again, please chat in some questions as we go. Jeremy, I will need your help because I can't see the chat room. But you can stop me at any time if anybody has a question or a comment, and I will ask for some input along the way. Okay, So the need for change, I think this is a little bit motherhood apple pie, right? This is obvious, but I do think it's important for organizations to really think about, okay, change is happening faster. It's more complex. It really isn't a choice anymore. It's going to happen. We know that it's here. It's going to be here in the future. We have to adapt to change. I think what's important is what is the driver of change, and really understanding that as a starting point when we're talking about, I need to manage this change. The first question is, what is the need for change? So if you think about these four quadrants, going across the x-axis there in the middle, is it an internal driven or is an external driven is the primary forcing function for change? And then if we look at kind of the vertical axes there, is it, future state that we need to change, or is it a current problem or situation that we're trying to address? I'll talk more about why this is important, but when clients come to Jeremy and I and say, okay, how do I get started? Well, how do I position change management? This is one of the first questions we say or ask is say, okay, what's the function, the forcing function or the drivers of change? And that becomes important as we start to communicate the need for change, the why we need to change, the why now, and we'll get into whose role that is in the organization here in a moment. So I was just curious, just to kind of, and please, you have to chat this in. Dina, my poll up everywhere. I tried it this morning. I wasn't comfortable going with
That's
it.
all right. Don't worry, we'll be
I
interactive.
apologize. I didn't want to take the chance.
Why don't we use reactions, David? So folks, if looks like Dave's going to ask this kind of a polling question. If you all would, in your reactions, raise your hand based on the question that Dave is going to ask here. You can get to them by visit the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's called reactions, and you'll see the raise hand option, or even a plus, a check mark would be fine too. So we'll kind of keep track for you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just looking for kind of a general theme here, but yeah, the question is, if you think of these four quadrants in what is driving change in your organization, what is the primary? And I know there may be more than one, but if you think of kind of the biggest changes or the single biggest change, whatever that is called in your organization, what's the driving force in by quadrant here? So I'm asking for kind of an A, B, C, or D response. All right.
I think you're seeing an overwhelming response of A's and an occasional C.
Okay. So let's and I'm not able to see them, but let's talk about the A. So what, who cares? What does that lead me to do next in terms of change management? If we know that there are some internal decisions around, current situation to move to a future state, right? That's both A and C. What that means is the messaging of why we need to change starts with our own business decisions. And we can articulate, we should be able to characterize or even use data to say, this is the current state, right? Our strategic plan is to move from where we are today to some future state. And we need to do that through some changes. And I'm going to talk about that as the technical side of changes. And that technical side of change needs to be adopted and supported. That's the people side of change. So let's just kind of play that through here. If we talk about change, the need for change. Come on, baby. All right. Back up. Sorry about that, gang. If we talk about the positioning or the need for change, the first question, the second question, okay, what's the driver? Second question is, are we looking at change as an organizational objective, or is it an initiative-based objective? And this is kind of a triage point at ProSci when we think about how we support our clients, because if it's an organizational objective, I want to improve our culture, right? That's kind of an organizational objective. That's part of your strategy is one of your strategic initiatives is transform the culture. So that's in that organizational bucket. Well, to us, that leads down the path of it being more of a competency initiative, right? We're trying to build an internal capability that we can scale, replicate in the future. So if that's the message, we need to strategically, we're committed to changing our culture. we know quickly that that goes in that organizational box. That's going to influence how I go about managing change. If it's, hey, we're going to implement new technology. I think Dina talked about AI technologies, new ERP systems, whatever. That's more of an initiative play. So if the driving force, and it could be still the strategy, but if the strategic initiative is around an initiative, then we need to prepare, we need to address that differently than if it was an organizational level. Now, many of our clients, it's both, right? Which means we're kind of running in parallel in terms of the strategy and the tactics that we're going to have around change management. So not going to ask you to respond, but think about that. Forcing function of change, what's driving it? And then are we going to be in the organizational kind of box? Is this an organizational level change? Or is it more of a project or tactical change, what we call the initiative level of change? Or is it both? Because those are critical questions to help shape how you're strategically, how you're going to go about deploying change management in the organization. Think about change, one more element here. We pro side define change management as the people side of change. Specifically, it's to enable the engagement, the adoption, and the usage of the technical changes that we are implementing. So it's critical to success that we recognize when we talk about change management that there's a technical component to change. You know, that's the design, develop, and deliver approach to the change. But there's also running kind of parallel to that is the people side. And what we want to do is make sure that those are managed, coordinated, not managed equally, but coordinated so that when we introduce that, deliver that change, that we have adoption and usage of that change. So both these components are critical to success. One without the other is going to sub-optimize the impact, the results. I'm an ex-GE guy. We used to call this the Q times A equation, where the Q is the quality of the change. And if we follow a technical methodology, we expect to get a good, high quality result, right? Solution. The A is the acceptance, which is the people side, the adoption of that change. So we could have a great T or Q, right? Outcome of that technical side methodology. But if we don't have adoption of that change, we don't have optimal results, and vice versa, right? We can't just talk about everybody being happy, I'm ready for the change, and then have a poor quality delivery. We have to have good technical solutions that are then adopted. That's where we get the optimum impact. So ProSci really focuses on that people side. That's all we do as a firm. So what, who cares? What's the ROI or the benefits to the business? This is some of our research. And the takeaway here is really not the 6X, it's the 3X. So our research has correlated to what extent do you have change management, poor, fair, good extent, good, excellent, right? How effective are your change management practices? And then what is the percent of project success as it is related to meeting or exceeding your objectives? And you can see that if somebody's doing no change management, no intentional change management, I'll say, you know, maybe they're in that poor bucket. Okay, they're going to have, 15% of their projects are likely to be successful. If I just do something, I go from 15% to 42%, 3 times improvement, just by doing something, by focusing on that, again, that people side of change, I'm going to improve my probability of success threefold. Now, if I start to replicate and scale that capability called change management, and start to integrate that into all of my work over time, I move to good, I might move to excellent. But just by doing something, we're going to improve by 3X. The 6X is the name of the slide at ProSci. We call it the 6X slide. It really talks about the correlation between your change management practices and your project outcomes. For project managers out there, this correlates to on time, on budget as well. So we know that there's correlation between good change management practices and outcomes of projects or initiatives. Okay. So that's all part of our research. So here's the key question, and this is maybe one of the takeaway slides I hope for you today, is when you're talking about scoping out change initiatives, a lot of time the attention is all on the technical side of change and resourcing that and the teams and the investments and the technology. At some point, somebody should ask the question, okay, what percent of this change initiative, the expected results of this change initiative, what percent are contingent or related to the adoption of that change? And what we know from asking that question to our clients all over the world is the numbers are 75, 85, 95, 100% of our success that we are planning for, that we're investing for, depends on people adopting that change. If they don't adopt it, we don't have the ROI. We don't have the expected results from the initiative that we scoped out. So then the follow-up question is, okay, how are we managing that? How are we addressing that? What are we going to do about that to make sure that we have good adoption? Because that's how we're going to get the return on investment that we expect. So this is kind of that, we call it the key question. So if that's a takeaway today, I think that's a win for me. Go back to your organizations and start thinking that way, asking those questions about what are we doing to support the adoption, the people side of change, and is that enough in proportion to the technical side? That seems to be where all the attention is. All right, so that's a little bit about how we, ProSci, think about change management. Let's talk a little bit about our research. And I guess, again, I had a poll set up, but I can maybe just ask a few of you to chat in some answers to this question. Maybe you know, but if you don't, what do you believe is the #1 contributor to successful change? And this, I've got the research-based answer on the next slide. So I'm trying to see what you think before I show you our response to that question. So what do you believe is the #1 contributor to change success?
We're getting a lot of good comments, Dave. I know you're not able to see the chat, so how about I read a few samples of them for the group? Would you like that?
Yeah, I did pull it up, but go ahead.
Okay,
If you got some that, if you got
No,
some
you go
you think
ahead.
resonate.
No, go for it.
Well,
As
now
long
I
as
guess
it's funny if you can see it.
I can't read and speak, Dean. You know
All
that.
right, that's fair. I'm seeing a theme around leadership and support. We've obviously talked about adoption. Engagement seems to be a theme as well. Roseanne chimed in with saying communication times 1000% seems to be a key success factor. Awareness, both stakeholder and in general buy-in, influencers, a clear path to success. So what does success look like? I think we've got some really good answers here. I don't know if we really needed you to come, Dave. Just
There you go. There you
I'm
go.
pretty impressed with her.
Actually, I am looking at it in, I'll come back to is it ABHA, if I'm saying that correctly? The awareness for the need for change. I'm going to come back to that one later.
Yeah, I see that theme here as well, related to understanding the why from Liz.
Okay. All right. So I can't argue with any of it, right? I think that's all critical. ProSci does what we call longitudinal research every 2 years globally. You see the years on the bottom here, anywhere from 2007 to 2019 was our last study. And one of the things that we do at the end of each study is publish our top 10. The top 10 has now become the top 7 contributors to change success. What has not changed in all the years of research is the #1 contributor, and it's active and visible leadership. So we think of change. We think of, again, going back to the research, that organizational, what your role is in the organization kind of indicates what role you need to fulfill in times of change. So what do I need to do in times of change? Well, if I'm an executive leader, I have a very specific role, different than maybe a project manager or a change practitioner or professional or a people manager. So I have a very specific role, and that has stayed the #1 contributor to change success. Going back a little bit to the sponsor success factor. And I think the way we address it, I'm going to address a couple of these in the next few slides. Oh, let me try this. The way we address it is through engaging them to educate them on how to behave, right? What do they need to do in times of change? How do you do that successfully? And the takeaway from this slide is, I think intuitively, right? There's correlation again between effective sponsorship and outcomes. But the slide to the right was kind of interesting, is that 52% of the senior leaders that we asked had little, no or some level, slight, very little, I say some are slight in understanding of what their role is in times of change. And I used to have a real job. I used to do a lot of consulting work, and I used to ask this question to leaders, hey, do you know what to do? And they would say, Dave, I really am committed to this. I want to be effective as a sponsor, or a champion is the term we used to use, but I don't really know what to do. You got to help me, Dave. You got to coach me. You got to tell me what to do. And we find that all over the place, that leaders just really don't know what they're supposed to do. And what we do is we work with leaders very unique to their role to create that understanding of their role. So the takeaway back in your organization is, don't be surprised if there are senior leaders or sponsors, whatever term you use in your business, that really they're well-intended. They want to be effective. They just don't know how to be effective. They don't know what to do. So we really have to support them. Now, ProSci's approach to doing that, it starts with what we call a sponsor briefing, but then they need some follow-up coaching and reminding of how and when to engage with change and so forth. But it all starts with really getting your senior leaders aligned around understanding the value proposition of change, understanding their role in times of change. We call it the ABCs of sponsorship, where they need to be active and visible and participating throughout the life cycle of that change, not just doing the kickoff and they're done, and the pizza party at the end and they're done. No, they have to be active and visible throughout the whole life cycle of that change. They need to talk amongst one another and build coalitions around the change and communicate directly. The key to communication, it's not in this presentation, but the communication, the key is what we call the sender of that communication. So a lot of organizations have change practitioners, they have communication, professionals, and they're welcome to script all those communications, but the sponsors need to deliver it. So the sender of certain information needs to come from senior leaders, and that certain information in time to change is the awareness for the need for change. Going back to that comment earlier, it's why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? What are the risks or the benefits associated with it? So that type of messaging needs to be delivered. It doesn't have to be scripted, but it needs to be delivered by senior leaders. When we get into the tactical changes and the impact it has on people, that message needs to come from their manager, not maybe a senior level leader, but their manager. So communication, yes, is critical. Everybody knows that. But knowing who needs to communicate what is important, and kind of drawing that differentiation. So senior leaders, executive sponsorship is what we call it, is absolutely critical to your change success. Contributor number 2 was a structured approach. And this, Jeremy and I tell clients all the time, hey, even if you don't use ProSci's 3-phase methodology, even if you don't use ADKAR, please use something, right? And we like to have some efficiencies by, committing to a common methodology, a common language, a common toolkit. There could be some variations of it, but you should have some common approach, structured approach to how you're actually mobilizing some of the change work that you do. So our approach is a 3-phase methodology. Most folks who know ProSci know ADKAR or vice versa. Some people think that's the name of our company, ADKAR. But ADKAR is ProSci's individual change methodology that is scalable to the organization. So it's kind of the common thread across, all the work that we do, whether that's training, whether that's project advisory or consulting, some of the strategic work and change. ADKAR is just a common approach to how we do our work. But if it's not ADKAR, please choose something, right? A structured approach is a success factor. So we think that's very important. If you haven't heard of or know of ADKAR before, here's kind of the 1-page summary. And really what you want to do is look at this as 5 elements. Yes, ideally they're executed and satisfied, they're outcomes. They're satisfied in linear or sequential order, but the outcome, I think, is what's important. So I'm not done with building awareness until people really understand why we're changing. They may not know what the change is yet, but they understand why we're changing. Going back to those 4 quadrants on the first or second slide, we built desire when they have committed or they have decided to, do what we need to change. And again, we may not know specifically what that is yet, but we see the need for it. I've decided that I'm going to support this change. Knowledge is typically the easy one. So knowledge is when I know how to change, right? I know what I'm going to do differently and how to do that differently. And then the ability is demonstrating that. So knowledge, a lot of folks think of is the classroom, right? And training is part of everybody's change plans, right? So I could go in the classroom, I gain knowledge, but I really don't have ability until I can demonstrate. I'm able to prove that I can do things differently and do them effectively and efficiently. And then the reinforcement is I will continue this now as the, the new process, the new system, whatever, I can continue to fulfill my role, my job and the tasks of my job effectively over time. And over that period, I'm going to sustain that change. So ADKAR is just it's a easy to remember, I call it a mental model. You got to build awareness and desire first before we send people to training. And the key here is awareness and desire should be built by your senior leaders. So going back to that role-based approach to change, what does senior leadership need to do? They need to create that awareness and desire for the change. The knowledge and the ability, who supports that, who drives that, a lot of times is the people managers with their direct reports, because those are the folks that are going to be impacted the most by the change. And then the reinforcement comes back to the senior leaders and the managers to make sure that change sticks. So you just heard ADKAR. I'll say just maybe choose one of the 5 letters, if you will. What do you think is the most common resistance of change of those 5? Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, or reinforcement? I have a prediction, and some of you will be right. You guys took the bait. Everybody says, number one answer across the board is desire, and that's what we hear everywhere we go. And I'm sorry to tell you, but the research says otherwise. The research says it's awareness, and specifically, they don't understand why change is necessary, right? And when you think about that for a second, if somebody asks you to do something, they're probably going to tell you what to go do. Our research says that people are going to challenge, why do I need to do that differently? So it's desire, you're right, is probably where it shows itself. So I can't argue with that response. But if you kind of say, why don't we have desire? What's the root cause of that? We got to go upstream to awareness. And we haven't done a good job of communicating why this change is necessary. So desire is the toughest milestone to accomplish. I accept that. We know that. However, if we do more work, better work around awareness of why that change is necessary, why now, what are the risks or benefits of this or not doing this, we'll have the ability to move through that desire phase more efficiently. Okay. So what does this look like? When you think about, now take ADKAR, awareness, desire, knowledge. I know what I'm going to do differently, and now I prove it, ability, and now I'm going to reinforce that. When we have change initiatives, we kind of we typically know in minimum 3 milestones, right? When we start, when we're done, the outcomes, and then when do we go live? So we typically know those 3 or have a good idea of what those milestone dates are and so forth. And I think in the perfect world, this is what ADKAR would look like against that timeline or over that horizon, is we're building awareness and desire shortly after we initiate this change. We're going to train some folks at some point along the way about what to do differently and how to do it. Before we could declare success, we're going to have them prove that they know how to do things differently, right? The change itself has been validated. And then we're going to start to reinforce that. The reality is a lot of organizations that we work with, this is what ADKAR looks like against the project plan or the transformation, is that we're not giving ourselves enough runway to do good work around awareness and desire building, which is where we need our leaders. We typically are saying, okay, our joke is, okay, you got an email on Monday to go to training on Tuesday because we're going live on Wednesday. We just don't plan proactively enough to provide ourselves enough time to do good change management work before we go live. And a lot of times we think of, it's the communication plan, but we don't validate if that communication plan worked, right? People heard the message, but do they really understand the need for change? Have we asked them? Have we done an assessment to say, okay, you received these communications. Do you understand why we're changing? Yes or no? On a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you understand the need for change? We haven't asked them, hey, are you committed to supporting this change? Do you have a desire to change? We don't ask them. We go from the communication plan to the training to the go live. And we just need to prepare appropriately, plan appropriately to integrate change management into the project management, if that resonates, when we have a change initiative. So, common approach, success factor. How do we, ProSci, address that? Is we train folks in our methodology and our tools and techniques. We call them practitioners. People know ProSci for their certification program. I think Dina mentioned that at the start. This is the program that results in a change management certification. So it's a 3-day program that we do with folks that do change work for a living. They could be project managers. They could be full-time change professionals. They could be scrum masters or scrum leaders. They could be HR business partners that are involved in change a lot. So different, kind of a broad audience. The common denominator is they are enabling change in their organization, and this will give them that structured approach and toolkit to do that. I'm not going to go through this, but this is a quick view of our methodology. Nothing fancy. Again, part of our approach is to keep things simple. So it's a very, I think, clean, easy to retain, easy to follow 3-phase methodology. And then we also have tools, right? So those who learn our methodology through that program are also going to get access to these tools. There's, what we call Research Hub and Knowledge Hub. So a lot of information around best practice research is electronically available. Knowledge Hub is where the resources to basically the training resources are housed that they can use as follow-up, after the training to go back and refresh and practice the applications and so forth. Proxima is our engine for actually guiding you through the change management methodology. So that is kind of the workhorse of the toolkits from ProSci. And then Instructor Hub is something that we use for our train the trainers. That's where we house all of our training materials for organizations that go get certified trainers to deliver our content. So the other constituent that really needs a structured approach is, well, there's 2 more that are critical: the project managers and the people managers. And again, different skills, different expectations of what their role is in times of change. So we have programs designed specifically for those, and they have their own tools. We talk about, this thing called, to the left, we call that the PCT, where you really need to understand, the 3 critical roles around any change. And I say roles because it doesn't have to be 3 people. It could be that, the project manager and the change practitioner are one and the same, but these roles need to be aligned and understand what they're going to do to contribute to successful change. So we either train them or we coach them if they don't know, but we need to make sure that we're keeping these 3 constituents, what we call the sponsor, the change practitioner, and the project manager. We need to keep them aligned in the work around change to be effective. That's critical. And we assess that alignment as part of our approach. All right. So my hope there was to think about, okay, what are some of the critical success factors? ProSci, leads with training, but then we follow up with coaching and consulting just to make sure we move from knowledge to ability. That's our approach. Again, choose an approach. I think what's critical is that though you understand that those roles are going to be leading indicators to your success, and we need to support those roles. We need to enable their success by telling them, training them, and then coaching them, supporting them to fulfill those roles effectively. All right, so how do I get started? And this is kind of the last couple slides. Jeremy and I often get this question, okay, Dave, with Jared, where do we start? You kind of heard our need for change. We said we agreed whether it was a organizational play or a project play. How do we get started? And there's not a wrong answer, right answer here. There are different ways to kind of mobilize change management. Again, our approach is always at the end to make sure that you have, as a client or a customer of ours, we're helping you build your internal capability. So we usually start with some questions down here on the left side, what we call factors, around how we design a strategy for change management. So again, not a right or wrong, but the answers, the range of considerations is what we call it here, will influence how we design that strategy, how we go forward with kind of the organization's buy-in or commitment to a change strategy. So I think the first one, the positioning, we talked about that, right? Is it organizational competency play? That's going to be heavy training. It's going to be heavy, that role-based curriculum. Or is it more of a project initiative or program? Transformation is a common thing in our business, right? Is that going to be the driver for change? And if that's the case, we're probably going to really stay focused on that PCT, the sponsors, the change managers, and the project managers. And we're going to teach them and support them in kind of real time on that change initiative. So they're developing their capabilities real time with some coaching and support. Not a wrong answer, right answer. Some organizations, it's both. Scope, again, organizational, functional, or individual. If you just want to get a couple individuals, started with change management as a discipline, pro-size solution to that is we offer a lot of our training and support to individuals through our, what we call public or open enrollment channels. If it's an organizational play, ProSci comes to our clients and works with them as an intact, what we call enterprise solution. The sense of urgency and the budget, I think, tend to go together. Again, that's another question we always ask. Are we looking for results in year one? Are we looking for results, 3 years now, where if it's a capability play, it's probably going to be a longer term horizon that we need to plan for. That spills into the budget. And then again, are you going to build your own internal training capability? And again, is it going to be outside help, internal resources, both? A lot of our clients have kind of a blended, they've got some support, external support with major change initiatives, but they're also building their own internal capability. So just some things to think about as you ask the question into your organization, hey, what's our strategy or our approach to deploying change management? We'd recommend that you think about these factors. So pro-size approach, and again, I don't mean to be selling on stage, that's not my intent, but just whether it's this approach or model or someone else's, we think it's important to have some diagnostics, some assessments, and some metrics around your change maturity. And the way Jeremy and I work with clients is we do this about once a year. So year over year, we're looking at using our audit model, how are we from a maturity level of 1 to 5 against these categories? And then based on kind of where we are today and where we want to be in the future, we do some action planning to fill those gaps. We prioritize the gaps and start to talk about, okay, next year we're going to do, these top 5 things. So we talk about measuring your maturity. That leads into some of the action planning, and eventually training comes into play because, part of that change management maturity, that capability you're trying to build, is having people knowledgeable and able to lead in times of change. So we kind of ask the question around, okay, who do we need to train? Who's our target audience? What's the volume? And on the bottom here, are we going to, hire external trainers, or are we going to start to build our own internal training capability? And for larger organizations, they can often justify the investment of building their own internal capability because they're going to do a high volume of training, and it just makes sense. It's also part of that maturation, again, as an organization, that you can customize, modularize, really be flexible with training delivery of change management. So at the end of, kind of our work with clients, what we call the strategic component, we give kind of a longer term, could be 12 months, could be 2 years, a deployment plan. And that deployment plan, the color coding here represents the different types of solutions. So it includes, tactics that the client's going to lead. It includes training and advisory work that ProSci might deliver or another firm might deliver. It's going to include licensing solutions. So it's kind of what we call a holistic solution approach to change, to where you have a longer term plan. We call it an ECM strategy. And we talk about, okay, what's within that plan. The thing I like about do this approach, doing this up front or at some point in your effort, is this kind of leads the witness on resource decisions and budget. Going back to those factors, the pace of play may change, which could slow things down from a investment or resource standpoint. It could accelerate as well. It talks about, it helps you evaluate, okay, what are the sequence of events, not just the pace of play over time, but what are the sequence of events? And those sequence events aligns kind of with, is it a competency play, organizational, or is it a project play? So that's going to influence that plan as well. So just a couple of factors that drive this that I think are critical that you should think about if you're planning the deployment of change management. So this, I wanted to show you this because that's an eye chart there, but that's the more detailed description. So let me take a breath. Thank you for sitting through listening. Jeremy and I would love to, if we've got time, would love to entertain questions. My hope today was really just to kind of remind you about, the forcing function of change and how to think about positioning change, number one. Number two was, okay, based on research, what are some of the critical success factors? And then maybe you can start to think about those in your own organizations. Are we addressing those? How are we addressing those? And then number three, if you're thinking about, okay, I need a longer term strategy to change management. I really need to make this part of the fabric of our organization. How do I get started? So that was my hope, was to kind of give you something to think about in those three areas. But we don't have to stay focused on those areas. If you've got some questions, we've got some time, Dina. I would love to have some Q&A if that's okay.
We do. We have plenty of time. So as mentioned in the beginning, we can take questions. Feel free to unmute your line. You can use the reaction raise hand. You can post it in the chat. We don't have any that have come through so far, Dave. Let me start with one real quick, just to kind of get other folks maybe inspired to ask something. The maturity model that you spoke of, which is a common term for us here within ACC, so we're kind of familiar with that. Would you recommend that that is something at an organizational level? Is it something that you would do within a particular project or an initiative? Can you talk a little bit about when that would be appropriate to do and for what size and what phase of a given project?
Be glad to, and if Jer, feel free to chime in too. So we typically recommend this at the enterprise level. ECM is our enterprise change management vernacular. There have been times when if a business unit, for example, we have a big utility client, they had a big business unit within the utility that we actually did it at that level. So it's typically at the enterprise level. There are some organizations where, not every unit within that organization is trying to build change capability. So we kind of scope them out. But our recommendation is kind of start broad. And then when we start to mature, we've cascaded this down. So for example, if we did an enterprise audit for, year one, maybe year 3 or 4, as change management is starting to mature, maybe we've got a CMO that's built some capability across the enterprise. We could start to do these audits at the next level down, the business unit level. Rarely at the program level, although we've done them at the program level. But that is one of the challenges to the audit, making sure that we have kind of the common scope in mind when we answer the questions, when we do the audit. So that's our recommendation. Let's kind of start high.
Thank you. Anyone else in the group have questions for Dave or Jeremy?
I actually do have a question. It's less about the practice and more about the research that goes into the methodology. How do you typically do the research, and over time do any of the methods of change? Sorry, couldn't think of another word.
Jerry, you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
You want to take that, or do you hear the question? Okay.
Yeah, so ProSci, over the past, as Dave mentioned, 20 plus years, has built this body of research. And so there's a few ways we go out and identify kind of clients. So one, we got to go out and acquire different mailing lists of groups, project managers, leaders, folks who we've engaged with, whether at ProSci or there's another body of kind of change management out there called the Association of Change Management Professionals. So we reach out to a number of these different groups and invite people to participate in the research. And it's a fairly lengthy study because there are questions that pertain to an enterprise level. So in the research report, and I've got a copy of it here, and it's pretty big. But there's sections on how to build enterprise change management maturity, and then also at the project level. And so depending on an individual's role, whether they're an executive, a practitioner, a project team member, there's different questions that we're asking of them in the research. And then we do a lot of data analysis and correlation. And so in the research, you'll notice that, yeah, they're not all using the ProSci ADKAR methodology. They could be using LaMarche or CAP or something like that. And so as Dave mentioned, having approach is one of those success factors. And there's in the research a lot of different methodologies and tools that come together in the research. So we send it out, I don't know, 70,000 plus people. Not everyone submits a response. So I think in this last report, in 2019, there were over 800 or 1,800 participants. And then we continued to just build on the past information and knowledge that we've gathered.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
I've got a question in the chat here. This is Kevin from Yum. And I have this question as well, and I kind of use the term influencers here, so I'm going to add that to your comment, Kevin. But we often hear about early adopters, champions, etc. Do those concepts factor into your approach? If so, how do these groups impact awareness and desire? I think in the era of social media and influencers and TikTokers, does that play a role, those types of named or unnamed individuals within an initiative?
The way we address it, in the short answer is yes, we do account for that in our approach. But the way we manage this is through our ADKAR assessments, and we call it an ADKAR analyzer. And what we want to do is when we know who's going to be impacted by change, we want to kind of know where they are on, it's not that we don't call it the change curve, we call it ADKAR, right? Where are they on the ADKAR scale? And then we make sure that we are moving the impacted groups through the phases of ADKAR at the same rate. So if we have some early adapters, let's say that, that are out in front of all this, but the rest of the impacted group is not where they are in the change thinking, we need to manage that. And we don't move on, we don't move forward and try to pull, our approach is not to try to pull those forward that are not at the same level of understanding and desire and knowledge of the change. We try to manage and get the others to kind of catch up to those that are out in front of this. I'm an old CAP guy, GE guy, and we used to say, okay, there you got the curve where you've got the 20% are resistors, and one strategy is to move the critical masses to influence the resistors. We actually measure that. We can kind of measure who, based on ADKAR, we don't call them resistors. We just know who's enabled to change, who's ready to change. We use ADKAR throughout to kind of assess this. So, Kevin, does that address your question?
Yes, it does. I think that, one of the things that we always think about, I guess, is that you get these early adopters to help to drive the change. But if the awareness isn't there, if the desire isn't there from their coworkers, it's still a huge challenge.
And you're agreed. And, one of the things that, again, going back to the sponsor role, the ABC's of sponsorship, is to build coalitions. So part of the coalition to do, if you will, is to help pull along some of those resistors, right? Influence those resistors. And again, the influence, depending upon what we call them barrier points of ADKAR, depending upon what barrier point, resistant point we're trying to address. If it's up in awareness, then we got to go back to senior leaders and say, help us, right? We got to go back with some messaging to that group that's kind of stuck in awareness to make sure they really understand why we need to change. So what the mistake is, a lot of organizations is they say, okay, Andre, you're the change professional. You go do that, right? You go tell them why, go say it again, right? Go back and revisit that communication plan. They don't want to hear from Andre. They want to hear from the senior leaders as to what the driving force is, the need for changes. And then when we get to what this means to me, right? The impacted individuals, they want to hear that message from their superior, their boss, I should say, their supervisor or manager. So a lot of times it's not the message that's wrong, it's who delivers it that's wrong. And that's something that our research is really clear on.
Sunder. Yeah, good point, Dave. Well, fantastic. We've got a couple of people that have hung on here till the end, so we appreciate everyone joining today. KJ from ACC had to drop off, but we do have Bronco on if anybody has any questions for ACC. KJ said there were no formal announcements to be made to the group, so we have nothing to pass on. And then I'll leave you with one final comment as you're about to drop off. We are in a transition period with our ACC champions, so we are looking for a new co-chair. I'm going to post my email address in the chat itself. If you have any interest to just, I'm going to try your practice here, Dave. If you have any interest in a awareness of why possibly you'd want to consider an ACC co-chair role, please feel free to reach out to myself or Andre if you feel more comfortable, and I can tell you a little bit about it and what the responsibility is and what the commitments are. But I can tell you from experience, this has been a very fulfilling experience personally and professional for me. And I encourage anyone that's even tempted to learn a little bit about it to become aware and reach out to me. So with that, thank you everyone for joining our February meeting. It was great to talk to everyone again. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jeremy. Contact information has been posted on the chat. It's also available on the screen as well. This will be recorded and added to the forum if you'd like to replay it. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Good talking to you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.